YouTube likes it when you post more stuff, so who am I to pass up a freebie with a lazy best of list for that sweet, sweet algorithm credit? It's a best of list. You know how they work. I'm going to ascend up the tree from least to most best, based off nothing but my opinion. There's no sampling on this one, since they're all brand new and there's every chance I'd anger a copyright bot at some point. I'll be going metal or metal adjacent, so while this is a metal channel, I'm willing to include some drone or D-beat or whatever since the crossover is likely quite strong. I mean, there isn't any, so I don't know why I'm clarifying this, but if there was, I'd have counted it. I didn't listen to a crazy amount of new music this year, around 300 albums, but I don't think 2025 was a particularly good year, so this won't be super lengthy. I'm recording this intro weeks before I finalise the list, so I don't know how many are going to be in it, so it'll be a surprise to both of us. I think my top 3 here are outstanding, but things drop off to a second tier after that. However, I still think that everything I'm going to mention is at least very good. Also, since this channel has been fairly underground focused, I do want to clarify I'm not filtering based off obscurity or anything like that. If Testament isn't here, it's not because they're too well known, it's because they're bad. I felt that 2024 was a step down in top-end quality compared to the absolute monster years we've been seeing since around 2015, with it lacking the heavy hitters which would match up to my top 12 of any of the years in that period. However, what it did offer was a reasonably high standard, with there being a lot more above average records than usual, possibly one of the highest counts ever. 2025 is like that 2024 lower peak phenomenon again, but also if the next tier down was also fairly barren. The main culprit for me is that basically all the little niche bursts I've been enjoying reliably of late kinda sat this one out, and haven't been replaced by anything which has gotten me too excited. The burst of brutal noise death that's recently provided a steady stream of utterly gawk chaos in things like nithing, trichomoniasis, sanguinary consummation, infibulated, and cadaveracity was largely absent, aside from a couple of exceptions which will show up on the list. The fancy French noble lavish mellow black thing didn't really have much going on, and as someone who really only gravitates to a certain subset of that subset with the super hyperactive ultra speed stuff like Pasiasme, Ultra Sylvam, Conifer, and Synopfer, it was a disappointment to not see it serviced at all. However, one of my top 3 basically provided that same experience, just without the mellow part. Disso Death continued to be whifflier than I could abide by, with the occasional band which remembers that the Disso stuff is meant to be the more messed up and off-putting style once again being completely outnumbered by the loser bands which had evolved the whole scene into endless jangly arpeggios. Even more aggressive entries like the Suffering Hour EP were produced to not be too scary or intense. The death metal LARPing as war metal thing I just did a video on slacked off a bit in volume after a lot of the heavy hitters put out follow-ups in the last couple of years. This year we have Pissgrave and Omega Vortex putting out fairly average releases, and that's kinda it. Hell, while I don't like to see much, even the dominant proggy Space Death thing really only had that Ancient Death album, which I didn't even like. I guess it makes sense given that the 3 biggest acts dropped stuff last year, but still, big out. Without these little trends to give it character or identity, 2025 feels like a hodgepodge of random albums without many grander narratives to discuss. That isn't to say metal didn't have any hyperfixations in 2025 of course, they just weren't in areas I gave a crap about. The bizarre nostalgic return to those horrible modern as of 2005 hyperclinical fake drum extravaganza styled headache death metal albums continued with stuff like Dormant Ideal or Cytotoxin. On the plus side, this scene did give us the hilarious Vermont gas station saga. While the maggot box spin retro death metal with beatdown mosh punk influence thing was quieter than usual, there was still a fair dose of it around, albeit without the heavy hitters. The Effluence and Cymax schools of jazzed up death and gore grind seem to have taken the lead over Enmity Core in the artsy chaos death battle. I don't actually mind this stuff as you'll see, but it isn't the basket I'd like to put all my nonsense extremity eggs in. Trad tend to do really well for people into that thing, but I'm a total extremoid and typically stay away from that scene without a lot of pressuring. Admittedly, some of that pressuring has paid off a lot for me this year, albeit without much consistency in how exactly. The main positive trend I've identified is that Ditto Black seems to have stepped up the violence a bunch. A lot of it is mathcore infused following the Serpent Column and Hoplites breakouts over the last few years, so it's not like we're getting my dream wave of Synergy of Molten Bones clones, but there's a handful of Ditto Black bands making harsh angular stuff instead of meandering Iceland worship or overly bookish theory exercises. It's not enough that I can really call it a proven change in scene mindset yet, but it's enough of a start to give me hope that we'll continue to see it further. Without me being super into any of these niches, this list is going to come across as a random smattering of things I liked, without much consistency and reasoning. Because that's what it is. Okay. One last thing before we truly get going. I just want to quickly mention a few things which missed out here which I thought might make the cut, but let me down for one reason or another. Hooded Menace is basically trad with growls at this point. I get heavy metal has always been a big part of their identity, and I like them for that, but it's just too far gone for me. One for the Peaceville fans now. This is the end of the Pissgrave era, and while it's better than the last one and is such a solid enough send-off, it still doesn't live up to the vileness of the first EP and album. The new Weeping Sores leans too hard into My Dying Bride. Sure, the violin is a part of the sound, but so is being Doom Puron, which I found to be lacking here. There are some great songs at the back end though. Next Gen's debut is basically the follow-up to Flesh Cathedral that we never got, but this one has pushed towards the normie-friendly modern black metal sound. You know, that kind of middle ground black metal which is a little bit of everything but nothing pushed to any extreme, all produced way too slickly. The Svarty Daddy parts are basically relegated to the softer and slower moments. It could be worse, but another beacon of hope in the Icelandic wastes is gone. I was aware that the new Kostnateni was going to be a bit of a goof-off experimental album, but not to this extent. Almost all the ripping hyper-aggressive Disso Black of the debut is swapped out for goofy new metal pastiches and twinkly synths and more reasonably minded focus stuff. It's all over the shop and largely dodges all the parts I want. I really like the last Room Magic album with its traditional elements merging in with the band's standard style of meaty death doom in a fun way, but this one just doesn't land. It still tries to cover a lot of trad doom elements, but the fun and bounce of it isn't there. Just doesn't work the same. Yellow Eyes mostly stopped doing weird shit and become another generic American post-Atmo black band. On a similar note, the new Blood Us Nord was too posty and space Atmo for me. It's on the melodic side of the band, which usually is excellent, but this is less epic and flashy than what I look for when Vinny drops into this angle. And finally, Dead and Dripping toned back the brutality, so their brand of brutal death Demilic is now just like normal Demilic. It's got a really weird production, very twangy bass driven. I just miss the extremity basically. And with that, let's finally get started. Number 14. Into Liberty, Excrescence, Anal Stab Wound, and Theurgy, Shirl, 4-way split. When New Stand Elite lines up a 4-way split, you pay attention. They always have top-tier bands going as hard as possible, and the split format means the subtle changes in each band makes up for the individual lack of variety. This one isn't as stylistically consistent as the other ones, with all the 4 bands doing pretty different things though. Into Liberty are a Brodequin-leaning, full-service brutal death band. Excrescence are a hyper-blasting noise death one. Anal Stab Wound are a jazzy tech death, Theurgy are a spacey tech thing. It's definitely not as uniform as these tend to be, which can lead to some inconsistency. Insalubrity and Excrescence are the most sensible pairing and probably put out their best work. They're both incredibly fast, noisy, ugly, excellent bursts of aggression which I wholeheartedly love. After this duo though, things get a little off the rails. Anal Stab Wound drops their "I'm 12 years old and I can play defeated sanity" bit to instead shit out some basic 2000s Colombian brutal death. It's not particularly good and it's outshone by the 2 earlier acts, while ignoring the technical highlights of their other releases. It's a weird stylistic choice. I guess I'd say it's to fit in with everyone else there, but Theurgy are completely different again, so that logic doesn't really hold up. While stylistically it's completely at odds with everything else, Theurgy steps back up to their demo levels after a kind of weak full-length last year. It does make them a weird fit for everything else, but it's solid output at least. All in all, it's probably the worst 4-way split NSA have put out, but it's such an insanely high bar that their worst is still an excellent output. Number 13. Toughness. Black Respite of Oblivion. With a name like Toughness, it'd be easy to assume this would be a maggot-stompy beatdown-minded album, but a quick look at the cover provides a more accurate surface-level summary instead. They're a Demilic clone. They're one of the more carbon ones going around, with at most a slight lean towards amplified weirdo groove. This gives the songs a fairly large sprawl as they'll sit on a wonky alien mosh for a while instead of jumping around so much, but I think it works. Otherwise, it's just another Nesmith with louder bass, more grounded guitar soloing, and beefier modern production. For whatever reason, I tend to be more accepting of direct Demilic aping than most, so your mileage may vary, but I enjoyed it a lot. Number 12. Revenge. Violation, Strife, Abominate. So, there was a Revenge album. Maybe it's a little easier on the ears than usual, but yeah, largely my thoughts are, so, there was a Revenge album. The slow parts are kind of the main thing holding this all together. The album is mostly the fast stuff you'd expect from them, with the same chaotic noise they always do, but it's broken up by a mix of Beharity gloom and still gloomy but grooving knuckle dragger sequences, and it makes for a nice dynamic. So that's something, but yeah, all in all, so, there was a Revenge album. Number 11. BYO Noise Generator, Subnormal Dives. I did say earlier that I don't actually mind the goofy jazz death scene, and here's some proof of that. BYO Noise Generator offer up a more authentic core of brutal death than a lot of these, which gives it something of a grounding for all the wacky saxophones and nonsense intrusions to play off. It's like halfway between Sarmat and 7H Target or something. As with all their releases, it is very short, which reduces the chance of the goofiness to get annoying before the absurd blast is over. Really good time if you ask me. Number 10. Exterior Pelnet Harigama 2. This is Disso Black that likes Synergy of Molten Bones as much as I do. We've had a horrible lack of bands trying to match Deathspell in terms of aggressive, messed up techie excess, so whenever I see someone try it, I've got to give them some love if only for having a crack. Don't get me wrong, it's not anywhere near as gawked as peak Deathspell is. There's quite a few fairly proggy, skittering and jazzy quieter breaks, and the vocals can be quite weak when the guy gets a bit too shouty, but overall this goes so much harder than most of the genre has in years, and that's enough for me. Number 9. Phrenolith, Ashen Womb. I enjoy Phrenolith enough to keep listening to whatever they put out, but not enough to really consider them a realistic threat of ending up a year-end list. They have a nice routine of faster than usual throwback death metal with a lot of riffs and energy, but there's never really been much sign of there being a greater spark beyond that. Solid 7 out of 10 band. Ashen Womb, however, has elevated their sound by putting a heavy focus into the riff length. It's still a relentless blast and trend time, which is heavily indebted to Dead Congregation, but the riffs are now much longer multi-bar trem lines which can take a few seconds to complete in full. There's like a mid-riff turnaround instead of just having one at the end of each repetition. It's like they found a way to have multiple phrases in the meat of each riff without them feeling like multiple riffs strung together. This gives their ever-competent second-to-second attack music a degree of detailing and information density. These riffs are much more narrative feeling and give an extended thread to follow through. It's a great step up for the band and gives it an edge over a lot of the other faster bands in the style, which can become riff slideshows. Number 8. Hate Forest, Against All Odds. This may be somewhat of a surprise given my first video here was complaining that Hate Forest is operating sub-optimally in the current day, but that should show just how much I like Hate Forest. While this is definitely the worst of the Reformation albums for me, Hate Forest is still Hate Forest, and I like Hate Forest. This could have been lost in the shuffle of a better year, but in 2025 a less epic and melodically fulfilling battering ram version of the band is enough to warrant a mention. It's a very narrow take on their sound, but it is impressively violent, and it's a good time even if it is lacking the usual epic versus brutal dichotomy. While the stripped-back approach does mean the couple of weaker tracks stand out negatively, if anything I've liked the album more and more over the year as a distinct entry in their catalogue, despite it theoretically having less substance to actually dig into. Number 7. Anal Stab Wound, Enshrining the Many-Fingered Grasp. Given Anal Stab Wound albums tend to be a little long, dropping down to a 26-minute EP is not the worst thing that could happen. Most full-lengths in this style are only about this long anyway. This one goes in the complete opposite direction of the down-the-line and kind of boring violence of the Shell Split, and instead softens up a bit and gets proggier and brainier. Almost like Nikhil wanted to do his own version of Defeated Sanity's Disposal of the Dead / Dharmata, but released each side separately instead of doing the self-split thing. This definitely doesn't go as full atheist as Dharmata did, so it's still in the normal Defeated Sanity worship wheelhouse, but there's a lot of proggier, slow down and wonky rhythms at play, with less focus on just blasting away and playing as technically as possible at that speed. As more of a fan of rip and tear ultra brutal tech death, I wouldn't say I like it more than the last full length, and some of the parts where it's softer without being as mind-bendingly complex do kind of miss me, but there's enough insanely advanced and impressive stuff here which blew me away that I still enjoyed this thoroughly. Number 6. Rathardus. Jesus Christ, I'm even going to try. Toviskerd Akurstis Orok Erzete Liedercherang? No, it'll do. This unpronounceable nightmare has a much easier listen than read. I think I consider it part of the Hooded Menace or Druid Lord rock out and party death doom scene, but it doesn't have that much heavy metal in it, so it's doing that mood with nothing but mean, slow death metal riffs. Maybe like a doomed out undergang? There is some variation to that template. It has really good trem bursts, and it can drop into a spectral, voicey, melodic atmospheric mode, but it doesn't care about vibes enough to waste too much time getting in and out of it. Really, it's just a monster of heavy riff-driven and entertainment-led death doom. It's held back by the drums being overdone, and the closer low-key sucks, but otherwise it's quite excellent. Number 5. Innumerable Forms, Pain Effulgence. I really like the combination of ideas here. In a lot of ways, this is the band's most outright death metal effort, with particularly the first half featuring a lot of top-speed churning drum abuse, which they are really quite good at for starters, but it's the contrast with the doom which sets us apart. The doom riffs themselves are pretty bog standard, but they've leaned into doing these super flashy and epic guitar solos over them, and it's great. It's sort of like how later Esoteric uses them, with the shreddy guitar hero awesomeness contrasting a lot of the dour everything else, just in a much dirtier and more compact package here, of course. I like both of these modes, so just swapping back and forth for the entire album is more than enough to keep me happy for 40 minutes. Number 4. Bubba, Cogwheels of the Pious Forge. This is actually the first entry on this list which would have snuck into my top 10 of any other year this decade. As I said, I don't rate this year much. But after this, we are in the sphere of excellence. Bubba are the first group of kids who got brought in to rebuild Dripping, who then split up and made a new band instead, and called it goddamn Bubba. The name makes it hard to not see them all as like 11 years old, but Bubba rules. It's Bredequin-styled, hyper-speed, pummeling brutal death mixed with overt mellow death sequences of all things. It's a nonsensical combo, and they haven't been coy about working a lot of mellow death parts into otherwise hyperblast-led tunes, yet somehow it all blends just fine thanks to the relentless gurgle vocals smoothing over the transitions. Toilet vocals cover all cracks apparently. They are a goofy novelty act to a degree. They do a slam version of the reggaeton breakdown from Knock Loose after all, but I think this works effectively enough with heavy impact brutal death that I can take the band pretty seriously despite the silly concept. Number 3. Valan. Popul Va. Listen to any 15 seconds of this and you'll instantly understand why this is sitting right up near the top. This absolutely rips. It has so many riffs. It could be compared to that Pazziasme debut or Ultra Stillvam style of black metal that just goes as fast as it possibly can and tries to stick in so many different riffs that it starts overlapping and clashing, resulting in a noisy and exhilarating thrill ride. But this isn't mellow black, and the riffs themselves are a lot weirder and twangy. It's a really relentless and savage album. The only real divergence from this are the Mexican folk influences, but rather than doing individual segments of each style like most bands, like Tom Bartley of last year, they basically just chuck a flute layer and acoustic guitar in the middle of the rest of the maelstrom, making some of these parts more chaotic and noisy than the usual metal stuff. Other than that, they'll do the same with some more symphonic keys, using the same way, but they never drop down into symphonic black metal placeholder riffs when they show up. It also has a very loud, aggressive late 2000s digital bedroom production, but a lot of drums and noise. Kind of like Endless Dismal Moan or super early Anol Nathrak, which could understandably put some people off. But with how clean modern black metal is when it's not being a delicate cold buzz, I like the sheer aggression of it. Definitely can be a bit tiring since it's basically this for 50 straight minutes, but it works for me. Number 2. Putridity. Morbid Ataraxia. Putridity was always going to be a safe bet to make the list, but I wasn't expecting it to be this good. They've said out basically the entire 10 years where going full Amity has been embraced, and after the debut, the band had generally been getting more normal and easy to process. However, they've read the room of the 2020s, and have leapt at the chance to just be mad lads. Morbid Ataraxia is likely the most gawked and noisy record to date. It's an absolutely relentless wall of hyper-brutality made of incomprehensible non-riffs and pinch harmonics, and I adore it. There's only been a few of these types of albums over the last couple of years, so I'm hoping the style has a few more entries coming up in 2026, because it's still hitting for me more than any other sub-niche of this decade, but if not, Putridity have given it a really great later phase entry. Before we go into my number 1, here's a quick lightning round of stuff I had thoughts on, but didn't quite rate highly enough to warrant a proper summary. Evoken had their most antithesis of light sounding stuff they've had in several albums, and I liked that a lot. Sadly, the gothy landings and breaking up of the heavy grimness took me out of it whenever I was getting a nice crushing misery going. I'm not really an Argus Limp fan to start with, so I was surprised how much I liked the second album from Argus Limp but not openly racist. It has a flat spot in the middle which kept it down though. Tower had a much better instrumental effort on their new record, elevating them to okay musically instead of slop carried by an amazing singer. Sulphuric Cautery are basically the last days of humanity too at this point. I hadn't thought about Doom Verses in about 12 years, and Structure was a nice reminder of how well that sadly melodic but presented in a heavy manner thing can work. Malthusian continue to be overly slept on in the world of occult, discordant death metal. Mephitic Corpse is nasty stuff. A filth highlight of the year even if I don't feel the riffs that much. Archaic leaned fully into being Doom Bolzer. I'm not the biggest Bolzer guy in the world, so I prefer the cavernous lean of the earlier stuff, but it deserves the buzz. If you like this one, and are a bit more of an arty type, I'd recommend trying out their side band Arrows, which is like a progressive, lighter take on the same idea. Cryptopsy have quietly become a reliably pleasant listen over the last 15 years, which is a bit of a surprise after how volatile their output was through the 2000s. It's not really a big statement on the album itself, it's decent. It's just a wholesome thought that stuck with me. About half of Kexelar's album is top 10 worthy. This is one of those ones that gave me hope that Disco Black had seen the light and wants to be extreme again, with a raw black metal appropriate production and ripping riff forward attack approach on about half of it. But the other half of the album is pretty loose and mellow which drags things down. Noise Trail Immersion was in my top 10 for most of the year as another entry in that heavier Disco Black category I'm so keen for, but it is pretty eye void hangery, so it ended up falling off. Well, that's enough of that. Let's finish this. Number 1. Scimitar. Scimitarium 1. So while I wasn't lying when I said I wasn't a trad guy, I do still sometimes have some land, and this is one of them. This side project of the Slaved Folk is pretty much exactly what I've wanted from trad for years and years. I've always been a sucker for the female vocalist just belting her guts out in the style, even if it's a little out of control. Tower, Mansion, Jess and the Ancient Ones, this French one I can't pronounce. It all just works for me, and having this type of vocal instantly makes a band 80 times better than it would be with a dude singing. As for the musical side, I like it when bands get a bit untraditional with it. Stick in a blast, play some evil trim, don't do any boogie rock or cock rock grooves, keep the gallant riffs to a bare minimum and so on. These are rarer, but when it happens I tend to really vibe with it. Satan's Host, Demon Bitch, Dawnbringer, or last year's Dionysus record all come to mind. Generally speaking, these worlds don't meet. Bands like Tower are absolutely vapid, phoned in, generic garbage, elevated only by their vocalist being 1,000 times better than the average band in the style. Demon Bitch may be the wildest and most exciting band the genre has seen in 30 years musically, but their vocalist is a tuneless headache who can't stand a note for more than 2 syllables. The dude sings in camel case. Scimitar, however, are the one that do both. The vocalist isn't as good as Towers or that French one. She's probably more of a drunk crooner like the one from Mansion, which is obviously still an awesome thing to be. And musically, they're basically entirely made out of black metal materials. Not like a Greek black metal type of blackened heavy metal, I mean like lively, heavy party time riffs made out of endless second waves tram and aggressive tempo shifts. It still feels like a clean traditional record despite all the blast beats, so it's not quite that they just got someone to sing cleanly over a black thrash album. It's just as heavy as it is melodic. Cemeterium is both my preferred chains up to the genre at once, and I'm saddened and annoyed that it's taken 50 goddamn years for someone to do it properly. Comfortable number one, no question. So that was 2025 to me. Not a particularly strong year by any means, and not one with any areas that excelled en masse giving it any real scene energy, but a year that indeed exists. As for the channel, I'm thinking that for 2026 I'm going to start doing little monthly recaps like this, since the algorithm likes the content spam, and this is a lot easier than the more structured writing exercise stuff I've been doing. I'm hoping it won't feel too much like slop, but it does take a lot of work to put together these other videos. I'm still working on the one I started when I began the channel, because it requires me to listen to about 250 albums, so having something at all coming out steadily while all my think pieces are at research walls can't hurt. At any rate, thanks to anyone who's watched any of my stuff so far. It's been really exciting to see likes and comments and stuff come through. It's been surprisingly fun. But for now, I'm off to get on the beers until 2026 fires up. See yas.